the Luminous Possibilities Podcast. We offer a diversity of perspectives from many fields of medicine, esoteric and ancient wisdom, and subtle energy, arts, and sciences. Find deeply fulfilling pathways for co-creating yourself, life, and human communities around you. Find inspiring attunements to your own optimal living roadmap, true authentic self, and the most radiant frequency for living life to the fullest. Hello, and welcome to the Luminous Possibilities Podcast. I am Keenan White, and I am your host, co-host, and we are also having other people on this podcast hosting and doing their thing and bringing on guests. So I'm your host, co-host, but I'm also, Mara will be holding space for me today to just talk a little bit about my background and what I'm here to offer. And we are going to explore embodying planetary energy.
I'm really excited to interview you today, Keenan, because I get to see the amazing light that you are in the world, and I'm excited for you to get to share with the listeners of Luminous Possibilities what you're up to.
Thank you.
So my first question for you is, how did you get to where you are in time and space?
Oh, wow. That's
it's a loaded question.
Wow, we're going right into the existential stuff, huh?
Mm-hmm. Or you can just...
I'll start on the human level.
Yeah, that sounds like a good idea.
Yeah. So, yeah, for me, I mean, I about 8 years ago or so, I started to really dive into reading and studying astrology. And I had my first astrology reading in Thailand, and it just totally blew my mind. It was just out of this world. Like, how does she know so many things about me, and how do all these pieces resonate? And she's looking in all areas of my life. And so once I got my first reading, which was about maybe 1 hour to 90-minute reading, I studied that chart for years and just kind of dove into it. And I spent a little bit of time going out of country and studying yoga and finding a teacher to study with. I came from a meditative background from my parents and sort of just started to explore what meditation and yoga is and how it might impact me and how I felt right around the time when I was in college and about to graduate. So I studied a whole bunch of different career paths. I studied interdisciplinary studies, and I learned a lot about how like messed up the world is getting, and how the combination of consumerism and a population growth that's getting out of control is causing a great deal of global environmental issues.
Mm-hmm.
And so I felt like I was getting, I was kind of depressed over all the topics. And so I just kind of like was leaning into what my parents always said, hey, meditate. If you're, whatever you're going through, have a, just quiet the mind and dive in. And so that was about the time when it started to land for me, like sitting and quieting myself and just allowing myself to literally be. And so I started to see how yoga coincided with all of that.
Mm-hmm.
And why would you start moving and looking inwardly and sort of like gazing at the eternal by an internal focus,
Mm-hmm.
and started to like just see how all that was clicking. And so as I got into that, I really just felt like I wanted to get out of this sort of cultural sickness that I felt from the party scene and just get out of the country and see what happens. And so I met a teacher out in India. His name is BNS Iyengar, and he's a master of Ashtanga yoga. He is a student of Krishnamacharya. And so Krishnamacharya was basically the father of Ashtanga yoga. And his two sort of golden students were Patabi Joyce, who came out to actually Boulder, Colorado, and had some impact here. Actually, maybe it was his most studied student. And then BKS Iyengar was, who wrote Light on Yoga and a number of other books. And BNS Iyengar was sort of like this, he was also a student, but was sort of off the beaten path a little bit. And so I got to spend some time with him, spent 4 months, and was sort of just seeing how a yogic practice would accumulate, through time and basically um, impact me. And I felt like I was just kind of, in some ways, reaching a plateau, like um, a place where transcendent states of being weren't enough. It was sort of like, what's the bridge from that world into the world of being, um, being in service to the world,
Mm-hmm.
having a family, etc. And on my way out of India, I went back to Thailand and had this reading. And from that point on, I just felt this coincidence, I guess, with yoga and astrology and seeing how this path of divine union, um, there's so many maps and pathways to experience our divinity. And astrology just felt like this way of kind of like playing with the gods and playing with the archetypes and playing with um, how they live inside of each one of us. So I don't know. That's at least a starting place with it all.
So you kind of coming out of college, having that disillusionment is what ended up driving you to even spend that time in Asia. And then from that, quieting the mind enough, it's almost like it created space for astrology to enter at a time where you were open and looking for something that could give you purpose, something that could allow you to give back to people. And then, also just kind of open up your world to maybe a more positive way of looking at things.
Totally. Yeah. Astrology. I mean, it just felt like it was more of a complete roadmap to the psyche,
Mm-hmm.
not severed from spirit. And so there's so many different schools in psychology, especially in the West, that really, we can take a little dip back into seeing how, like, when did that happen? And there's this kind of Cartesian dichotomy that happened, this sort of severance of the mind, the body, seeing the body as mechanical and really not recognizing spirit. And it was astrology that sort of represented this fuller map to, wow, there's this body, mind, there's our emotions, our spirit, and there's all these areas of life. And based on these planets that are in these different houses or signs, you can really see, what is my soul's evolutionary path? What am I
Mm-hmm.
here to do and accomplish? And so you get this natal chart, this birth chart that gives you a picture of, what your soul came to do. It's sort of like this map to the unconscious
Mm-hmm.
and the school of life that you're in this incarnation. And from that place, that's a static picture. And
Mm-hmm.
there's ways to really look at that natal chart in its progressions through time and witness, what happens when these planets move through time and space slowly, and how's that impacting you. And you can actually look at that and sort of see what is your current um, stage or state of evolution. In a way, you can sort of just see what's resonating with you and then the chart, and you can see so much information.
Yeah, I've had the privilege of meeting a lot of your clients and me getting to be a client, obviously myself. And it's really impactful the way that you look at the chart and the way that you help interpret those energies in a way that we can really begin to take that information and use it to grow on our soul's path and also feel affirmed and kind of confirming that we're on the right path. So when you had that first reading, was there something in particular that sort of clicked for you around one of the planets or one of the signs where you were able to see yourself in a different light and say, oh, now I get it. Maybe there isn't anything wrong
Mm.
with me. This is just the way I'm wired.
Yeah, it's a great question, and thank you. Yeah, it seems to me like it was really the whole. There wasn't anything necessarily in particular, and it was because it's so complex. I mean, when you first look at a chart, if I think back on that moment, there wasn't anything really that stood out. It was sort of everything as a whole.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
Was she kind of able to point to some of the disillusionment you had experienced up to that point, and you were like, whoa, that's showing up in the planets and the signs?
Not really, because I don't think I really express from that point of view.
Uh-huh.
And really, like, as an astrologer, you're going to meet your client wherever they're at.
Right.
So for me, I was sort of like on fire. I was like loving
Mm.
my life, and I was lit up, and I was
You'd
excited to
already escaped the
explore.
college drudgery.
Yes. Yeah, so I wasn't really bringing that into context at that time. Um, but yeah, I mean, I suppose the biggest thing was seeing how, um, some of the nodes were working,
Hmm.
and to see that the nodal axis really represents this evolutionary journey of your soul and what you're working through and what you're
Hmm.
letting go on the south node, and then what you're integrating and pulling in on the north node. And so I was really just seeing how, wow, like through Virgo, through this um, sign that generally is, um, I think it has a lot to do with conditioning. And so perhaps that's what I was feeling. I was feeling that from college, like feeling the conditioning of my culture or of my education. And that Virgo archetype is really, to me, like the Virgin. It's it's not necessarily relating to sex, but it's related to this virgin, pure sense of self outside of the conditioning,
Hmm.
or a purity that can recognize all kinds of conditionings because of being able to see the particularities, the judgments, to analyze what's happening. Um, and so, from moving from that south node of Virgo to um, a north node in Pisces, it's a sign that's ruled by Neptune, and it has a lot to do with, moving into more of this union space, this oneness, this trust with the higher energies at play, not just the dualistic ones.
Hmm.
So there's, I think, a larger alchemical process at play between Virgo and Pisces. But I think the key word there is really discernment on the Virgo side, and learning boundaries, and discerning through all the different kinds of ways of seeing things, and then alchemizing, that put if you're going to dissect it, how do you put it back together? How do you bring a sense of wholeness from these disparate parts?
Hmm.
And then on the Pisces side, how do you trust that you don't need to be in control with that there's a greater intelligence to acknowledge and um, play a part in, and co-create with.
Yeah, and all of the readings that I had before we met, I'd never had an astrologer really focus on South Node and North Node. And for me, there was a piece that sometimes it feels like, at least the readings I had had, it was kind of predicting the future as much as possible. Like, okay, well, what's going to happen? But there wasn't as much about acknowledging the wisdom of the soul. And that's what I love about the readings that you do, is you help people to really identify who they are, what they're great at through what their natal chart looks like, and then give them tips and clues to kind of move forward in an even more holistic view.
Yeah, totally. I mean, it's one piece, I think, in the picture of health, and it's to no one's fault. I mean, we to be sort of severed from this idea of soul. I mean, if you look up soul, it really means body. And I think there is something with even the relationship we have to our body that we're not exactly in tune with. I mean, it wasn't, until maybe a few years ago that I really started getting in tune with my own body, in the sense of, having a dialogue with it. Like,
Hmm.
what do you want, body? What are you feeling? And then actually listening and using your intuition, and feeling into that. And I think there's this interface between how you see the body and how you relate to it that gives you an access point into the soul.
Hmm.
And so what I try to do with my clients is just bring a sense of what's happening with you right now in your body. And we listen to the body a little bit and get a sense for how things land and what sensations are coming up, and just give a little more space for that. But then, of course, you can work, more in the mental plane
Hmm.
with seeing a couple pretty key important points for the soul and the soul's evolutionary path, which really has it's everything to do with Pluto. I mean, the Pluto placement is really where the soul has tended to play out, you know, where the egos have been, through the many lifetimes, and what the overarching, theme of the soul path is. And once you sort of know that, you can kind of see that Pluto represents this like dense point, or this, um, it's sort of like, I mean, another way of seeing Pluto is that it's the condensed moon, and the moon is sometimes seen as the ego. but it's sort of our subconscious memory bank. And so there's a relation to the way we can act and behave based on our subconscious. I mean, human behavior has so much to do with the subconscious world.
Hmm.
So the moon shows a lot about how we're going to act, based on our needs and our emotional streams. And Pluto really represents like how that the moons and the way of being in the world has um, it's sort of like played out in this area, being the sign and being the house placement. And then the south node is really like a greater context to that. It gives it a little extra of a subtle layer. So yeah, there's a
Yeah,
lot
there's
to unpack.
and a lot of the conversations that we've had, one of the things that I've really started, the kind of the view that I like to have is that as souls, as we're incarnating again, you already mentioned previous lives, and as we're coming back into the world, I get the way I like to see it is that we're actually arranging our natal chart as a way to sort of give ourselves clues as to who we've been before and who we really want to be here on the planet. And so I know you do um, readings for kids, and you also do a lot in embodiment. So that's sort of two different, totally different topics. But maybe let's start with anything that you want to talk about as far as maybe our soul's way of designing how we come into the world, and then we can move on to some of the cool work that you do with more of like the embodied astrology.
Yeah, that'd be great. So yeah, I mean, the way I see it is that we kind of have this layer, and that is the zodiac. Zodiac means life path, and depending on the way that these planets are arranging themselves, I think it has everything to do with when a soul is going to come here.
Mm-hmm.
And so there's a very particular and precise timing in which a baby's going to be born, and I think that choice has a lot to do with it. And typically we think about choice on an egoic level, but um, as above, so below. I mean, there's a parallel to any truth, um, and so how we see things here really applies to the soul. And so I think if we're choosing here, and choice has so much to do with our path, because we really are divine creators. And so I think about the life path as um, in the zodiac as this, we have free will, and then we have this higher self that we can attune to, and we can converse with and connect with. And yet I think we come here in a large sense to forget who we are, like play this game of the great forgetting
Mm-hmm.
and the great remembering. And the astrology chart really is like, do I, like, will I remember that part of why I came here? And so when I look at a chart, I always think like, okay, so what might we explore to bring back some of this remembering? Because to me, it's not as much, um, looking at a chart and then seeing what someone's going to discover. It's almost like a rediscovering process. And so every time something comes through that's clarifying, it's usually like, oh, well, I knew that. I totally did. But then prior to the reading, they probably would have been like, oh, that wasn't really in my awareness.
Yeah, there's something magical about what you're able to point to. And I've experienced that, especially in my relationship around Venus as a planet. And this kind of ties into the concept of body work or the embodied astrology, in that we store a lot of those memories. And you and I have had some pretty wild experiences with body work kind of tied into what's happening in the astrological chart and transits. And you've got some amazing talents in helping people to kind of land that more in the physical through their body. So can you speak to your experiences
Thank
around
you.
that?
Yeah. Yeah. So I mean, when I was in Thailand and I had that reading, I knew, I really thought I was going to come back to the States and go into Chinese medicine. And I was talking to an acupuncturist there who was serving ayahuasca. And him and I sat down together and we were talking, and I ended up going to an ayahuasca ceremony with him. Um, but it was that moment of really seeing this man and feeling, our philosophies converge in a way where, like maybe yoga, body work, some of these things coinciding with each other might allow for more freedom and movement around the world. Because when you you go into Chinese medicine and you're an acupuncturist, you have to build a practice. You settle in, and there's a part of me that was a wandering soul. I wanted to move around. And so I when I came back to Colorado, I got licensed as a massage therapist. And I've been working in Western and Eastern techniques and energy work. And so I've really got about maybe 7 years of body work training and working on bodies and understanding what can come through. And it's so interesting to see the field of medical astrology and the roots of it. And it's, um, the way that medical astrology has been something that's, um, it's been accepted, and it's also not been accepted. And to really, that's for a later conversation, really, about what how astrology falls into the validity of science or not.
Mm-hmm.
um, because it really has so much to do with religion having an influence, and science almost becoming its own religion, to me. So I'd love to talk about that later, but really seeing, um, being able to study the chart and see that planets actually correlate to chakras, and they correlate to organ systems. And really, planets are they're another word or term for, um, many other ancient wisdom traditions have names for. Like, there's doshas, and there's the gunas, and there's these different qualities of consciousness. And so really, planets really have, they're representative of a specific consciousness. A sign is a specific consciousness. And to me, the zodiac is the totality of human consciousness. And when you look at the body and you see what's going on, we can see that really we have a level of consciousness at all parts of the body, and the body is incredibly intelligent. And so what it's been for me is kind of just like looking back and seeing how these medical astrologers have, mapped out the body and said, well, this is generally where Scorpio and Aries is, right in the belly. Then we can see really how, like, Aries, in Taurus down to the neck. So Aries is at the head, Taurus is at the neck, Gemini is kind of upper chest, and so down all the way to Pisces being the feet. And seeing sort of what's going on. So, seeing how, if someone has some condition in the body that is present in a certain level of their body's consciousness, then what's going on in their chart, and how do those coincide?
Yeah,
So that's,
and
I
even
mean,
how
without
that
going,
ties back into a previous life or something like that can be pretty amazing to discover too.
yeah, because you and I have explored on that level.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah.
Sometimes it blows me away how quickly, as you bring awareness to something and you're really ready to integrate it at a soul and body level, how quickly all of the systems can come online to support that reintegration of wisdom that you're bringing through from a previous life. And having a tool like getting to work with an astrologer who can support you in knowing what's coming, what transits are happening, what's shifting, can really bring that awareness to the forefront. If you're, really feeling like you're a soul that's here to shift and change the reality or make a new reality, there's so many tools that we can work with, and you're an incredible being to help support that for people.
Thank you. I appreciate that. Yeah, I think astrology offers so much, and astrology is becoming pretty popularized right now. And there's a lot of cookbook astrology. There's a lot of just, well, I know astrology by my sun sign, so I know I'm an Aries, and you're a Libra. And so, okay, cool. I read my horoscope, and that's,
Right.
It's got this news for me. But to really sum up what's going on for you from your sun sign is it's practically ridiculous, because the sun sign is only one piece of the chart. It's only one part of our consciousness. And it does represent the heart, and it represents our life force energy and our magnetism and what lights us up. And so when we look at the solar system and we think about the parallels to consciousness, the sun is, it's huge on an astronomical, mathematical scale compared to the planets.
Right.
And so I can see, why the sun sign has become it's become the thing. Like if you know your sun sign, you look up your horoscope, but I definitely urge people to not summarize or get a sense for what astrology is from horoscopes, because um, it's just so limiting.
Right.
We have so many pieces that we can explore, um, and so yeah, I mean it's been really fun. It's a fun process to explore and start to just kind of ponder and look into the chart and see what's going on for yourself, and then look at the transits and see what's going on in the sky right now. And
Hmm.
what I've seen um, is just, it's almost like it's just mind blowing constantly in a certain sense when you see what's happening now in the sky, and then the things that cross over certain planets.
Hmm.
So there's a transit going on, a major transit, which is basically, some planet moving over another planet in your chart. So say, Mars is going over the sun, or it's going over your natal moon or your ascendant.
So
Those
that
those
basically
three.
means, for maybe people who aren't totally versed on astrology, that'd be where the sun and the moon were placed the minute you were born, and then what's crossing over that in the current sky. And then that can have influences on how we're feeling, showing up, etc.
Totally. And if Mars or Venus or something is going over one of those points, it could be also going over your natal, another planet.
Hmm.
Um, and yeah, the vernacular and the terminology is a little confusing at first, but um, when that's happening, I mean, you can feel an activation, because to me, there's the planet going over that planet in your natal chart, and then whatever sign it's in, it's sort of like this emanation, or it's this, um, it's sort of a a transformation at a subtle level of the body, mind, spirit, the whole part of you, that's occurring based on what it's going over. So if you have Mars going over the sun, then you're going to have some, probably, since Mars represents something that's, it has a very separation energy. So it has a lot to do with our desire body,
Hmm.
and it has a lot to do with just um, creating from what we want and what we desire and going towards it. And it has a lot to do with freedom and just experiencing a greater sense of feeling free, feeling strong, vital. And Mars rules the blood. So we can gather a little bit there. But if it's going over your sun, the sun is an essential part of you. So there's probably an essential part of you that at the core level feels very, like what, maybe something's shifting in my desire body. Maybe, um, maybe what I've been wanting in my life is not what I want anymore. And to know that is so helpful, because if you're going through that energy, because you will anyway, it doesn't, I mean, to be aware of your astrology chart or not, you're still going to be, going through your life on your journey. And so I think what's so useful about astrology is it gives clarity to that. It gives some kind of language to say, oh, that's what I've been feeling. And then to understand the timing, like, okay, so Mars will be crossing over my sun for, you know, the next 3 or 4 months. And so if I give myself that space to sort of work out what's shifting in my desires, then what might change for me in a beneficial way, versus sort of being like, I don't really know what's going on, but
Yeah. I
I
think that's
think
a
I
huge
do.
point, because a lot of times, I think, especially in Western culture, we can be pretty hard on ourselves. Like, we want to do things faster, be more efficient, make it happen. And sometimes stuff's just not happening. And if we can be in touch with what's shifting, and maybe it's that we need to give ourselves 3 or 4 months to really assess what's important, and that there's absolutely no reason to try and push it any faster. I think, Mercury retrograde is a great example of, like, kind of what's become more the infamous, slow down and don't sign any contracts during this time, and that sort of energy. But it's using the astrology to inform and maybe permission ourselves to slow down a little bit.
Hmm. Yeah, because really with any transit that's going on, I mean, there's some aspect of the divine coming through.
Hmm.
And to me, that divinity is really, it's about light and it's about shadow and it's about polarity and the unification of both. And so there's always going to be sort of, this beneficial and drawback side of things. There's always going to be like a light side and a dark side. And so how do we resolve the differences? How do we find a way to unify what's appearing to be separate?
Hmm.
Um, so yeah, it's hugely helpful to think about these transits as gifts because they
Hmm.
really are. If we open ourselves up to them, we can scream, like, screw you, Mercury, Mercury retrograde again. And
Right.
we can sort of like damn the planets or damn our own divinity, so to speak. Or we can open up to, oh, so this really isn't working and this isn't happening. How might I slow down and listen in a
Hmm.
little more deeply to what's going on? And that's where the shamanic astrology sort of comes in. It's sort of making friends with the living consciousness of the planets. So if Mercury retrograde is going on, how do I actually listen into Mercury and use this time as this window of opportunity and to connect to um, maybe more of a divine plan? And Mercury's, I mean, he's the translator. He's the, you know, someone, I mean, he's a part of us. He's this archetype sort of living through us. And we may have a greater access to our soul's path, or to a greater unfolding at that time.
Hmm.
And so if we're trying to fix things and move things and make things work and we're not slowing down, I mean, how much are we really missing out on?
Right. I'm so glad you transitioned to this, because this, I think, is one of your most incredible gifts, is actually giving the personification to the planet and then supporting people in learning how to create a relationship with these planetary energies. And the first time I heard it, I was like, what? Planets can talk? And then I started thinking about how so often we refer to Mother Earth or Gaia having a frequency and an energy, and we can feel her and you can ground. And so, why wouldn't it be that way with all of the different planetary energies? And so, to have that perspective is just such a cool way to work even more deeply with our astrology to create those relationships.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, I mean, it's beautiful in that sense, because Gaia, this idea of Gaia being that the Earth is alive, it's a living organism.
Hmm.
How is that any different than any other planet? And so that's the viewpoint of shamanic astrology, is sort of, awakening to this way of journeying with the planetary consciousness. And really, it's, you don't have to think about it as journeying with a planetary consciousness, but because it lives within us. But from that perspective, we can gather so much, because astrology goes way back. Um, I mean, it's one of the most, probably it goes it's one of the most original ways of knowing the world, knowing oneself, knowing the universe. Um, I mean, it's the study of time, study of light, study of nature. And yeah, I mean, seeing these different ways that planets work. I mean, knowing, for example, I can bring in one of my own charts. This has been something I'm feeling even today, which is Mercury in Pisces. And I have this Neptune is going over, it's transiting my north node in Mercury in Pisces. And so for me, like, having a Mercury in Pisces, that's really the way I extract that is, well, Mercury is the part of us that thinks and it's communicating, and it sort of pulls in, it's our antennae in some ways. It's how we communicate. It's the communication style. And Pisces is like the void. It's like, um, it's kind of formless. Virgo is the formful sign. I mean,
Hmm.
it's like, this is, a microphone. It's black. This plant is green, and it has this particular texture, and it's a way of breaking it down. Pisces is like maybe merging with the plant and being like, oh yeah,
I am a plant. Am I a plant?
I have no words for this experience I'm having with this plant. So sometimes for me, like, I realize, like, wow, I'm really here to um, be more of a translator to the ineffable.
Mm-hmm.
And like even now I can feel in my throat like something's going on here. And I mean, there's a Neptune, the planet is in Pisces right now. And so it's impacting all of us. But in particular, Mercury rules my chart.
And you have a Pisces North node.
And it's right.
So it's like pulling you, it's like almost like all of those energies are pulling your soul from the form, which is your south node, what you're used to,
Yeah.
into this like expansive void of
Yeah.
unorganized space.
I know. And it's like, it's frustrating. And I feel this tension,
Mm-hmm.
like of why can't I get this particular thing to work? And why can't I get, and there's a part of me that does want to have it all together and organized and all that, right? And there's a part of recognizing these planetary energies playing out in my chart,
Mm-hmm.
and which is really just my life playing out,
Right.
my life path moving and evolving and taking shape and taking new form. It's like, whoa, I'm if I can relax a little bit into the formless and like
Yeah.
just trust, like if the details don't all get together, like will that be okay?
Right.
And then there's a big part of me that's like,
No.
fuck no, no it won't.
Virgo moon and Virgo south node. It will not be okay.
Yeah.
But sometimes we're so busy trying to and I think I want to speak to this from a cultural piece. Is we're born, in a lot of us in the Western world, and there's certain expectations that exist about how we're supposed to show up and work to live, and that's supposed to be the most important thing. And a lot of us are feeling like we've been crammed inside of a box that just doesn't fit. And sometimes using our natal astrology probably can support us in saying, wow, no wonder this doesn't feel right, because it really isn't what I'm here to do.
Yeah, totally. And I'm like, it's dawning on me right now with my Virgo South Node. It's like I go into the story in the beginning of the podcast about these details around the drudgery of school and education and like the cultural context. And it's very much a Virgo story, I think, of like recognizing and like, is it really, the path of my own conditioning, whatever I've experienced in that self, in that sense, perhaps I really felt it, and that pushed me into this other journey to like leave my cultural context and see what else is out in the world. But there is, I think, in general, like this tone that our country, our world is having right now, as things are taking such a different shape so quickly, especially by technology, and the ways that we're connected to each other in a global sense, that work and the way that we're pushed into that, and we're constantly inundated by messages and information from all over the planet. It's unreal. And so in this time, to get a sense for how to navigate that, and to kind of come back to like the roots of the planetary roots in a way. And this is where Cosmic Roots was born, as that idea of recognizing that as we get in touch with nature and we go back to nature, and there's this whole grounding movement, going to the earth and spending 15 minutes on the earth. And there's a part of me that wants to have more of a regular practice and encourage a practice of 15 minutes looking at the sky at night, because it's the same thing.
Right.
It is our roots in a certain sense. We're not just beings living on this planet. There's so much going on outside of this planetary context of the earth.
Right.
And to think that there's not, it's interesting. It's an interesting perspective that we've had as
right, that we're the only thing, and the whole everything revolves around us. And as we get to spread out further into space and learn more, we're realizing, whoa, we're probably not the only beings here.
Yeah. So there's a couple of things I was trying to connect there, but I think what I was going with was, like I'm starting to recognize, like, wow, I could really relax a little more into like just being, like trusting, surrendering. And I know that's in my chart. I can see that, and if I didn't, what would I'm not sure how I would navigate things. Like maybe just my, I mean, there's so many tools out there, and astrology is not the only one, but it provides such a large context um, for this microcosm macrocosm interaction.
Hmm.
And yeah, it's been a blast
Well, what I love about
playing
your
with it.
work is that you do mini readings and you'll do a one-off reading, but really where when people can give themselves kind of viewing this almost as coaching, give themselves the ability to do, 3 to 5 readings to really dive into their natal chart, understand who they are as a soul, and then what's going on for them in more of a transit type, what's currently happening in the sky is incredible. So I would love for you to speak a little bit maybe about what you're doing to take that more into a coaching space and how
Hmm.
people can kind of understand that taking this astrology can actually help them build a life from a coaching perspective and also maybe branding as well.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, that's um, it's all intersecting, right?
Totally.
And having a Gemini career house like myself, it's like people with Gemini in the 10th house. If you're listening and you have that, I mean, it's you tend to have many careers,
Well,
many
and,
different
and and you're able to
areas.
just acknowledge that that's who you are instead of saying I'm supposed to do one thing. It's like, no, I've figured out how to have this cross
Hmm.
section of experience and career.
Yeah, yeah, totally. I mean, I think to to go back to your question and point to the coaching a little bit. Yeah, I mean, I think, to me, like the way I work is like coaching works as a term, but I find that the more and more I'm working with people and I'm alive on this planet, I'm like, whoa, I'm more of a channel for these energies and these planetary energies. And so what I do is I just create the intention to be a channel for what wants to come in the highest good of my client, and to connect my higher self and my guides with theirs,
Hmm.
and to play in that intuitive Pisces space, like play into the psychic space a little bit. Um, but the coaching, I mean, like the zodiac, there's 12 signs, and that's a lot of signs. That's a lot of archetypes. So the way I simplify that a little bit is to say that it's really 6 pairs of two.
Hmm.
And the reason why I pair signs together is if you're going to talk about any sign, it's worth talking about the opposite one,
Hmm.
because we live in a world of polarity. And so on the coaching level, that's kind of what I offer, is how to sense when there's too much of a polarity. Because in some area of life, whether it's relationships, career, it's a personal matter, it's in the home. I mean, there's so many contexts. It could be in our community, work, um, purpose and mission, how we create value, all these areas. Um, what's out of balance? And you can kind of see that. Like if there's a number of planets in a particular sign, you can see how there's a particular polarity that's emphasized.
Hmm.
And I always say that there's an antidote for that. There's an antidote because it's sort of like doing so if you have a ton of planets in Capricorn, then your antidote or your medicine is Cancer, because generally you might be imbalanced because there's so much emphasis on work and status and responsibility and making things work day in day out, and there's Saturn, which rules Capricorn, can be very constricting.
Hmm.
And so Cancer, the opposite is like, no structure. It's the boundless, formless feeling space. um, and so to kind of connect those two and work on a level of um, helping people see the nuanced, subtle pieces, because when we're living our lives and we're just going and we're doing our thing, it's hard to see our blind spots.
Hmm.
And so the coaching is really, like, I call it soul alchemy coaching. And to me, I'm finding questions and perspectives and points of view that might open the door to a new space, and invite the person, the client, whoever it is, friend, anyone, to um, just open up to this other side, to start creating perhaps in a new pathway with something else that might support what their soul's here to do.
Hmm.
And there's a real subtle, nuanced sense of, um, the energy we're carrying in the triggered spaces we're holding. I trained with Dr. John Demartini, and he's a polymath, sort of a savant kind of man who studies pretty much everything. I mean,
Yeah, he's read like 10,000 books or something.
I think it's like 27,000 books.
27,000 books. It's amazing.
Something like that. I think he's
Yeah.
equivalent to like 13 PhDs in all of his read knowledge. And if you ever get a chance to um, meet or know Dr. John Demartini, I highly recommend him. He's amazing, and his work is all about polarity. And so I was trained as a Demartini method facilitator, and so I facilitate people with taking the emotional triggers and static out of their life and recognizing, seeing these ways we've perceived in a certain way and created a story that's ruling our lives in some ways.
Mm-hmm.
So there's a way that astrology sort of opens the door and allows us, me and the client, to see what's there, and then we can start to play in a different way from there.
Mm-hmm.
And the soul alchemy is really just seeing that so much of this is an alchemical process,
Right.
where just bringing a new awareness to a certain area of life changes our physiology. And Bruce Lupton's work on biology of belief and Dr. Joe Dispenza, I mean, they're really pioneers in the fields of epigenetics and quantum physics, and how connected, our thoughts and the things we think and the ways we perceive are to diseases and conditions in the body.
Mm-hmm.
So in some ways, that's where I like to kind of categorize my work as somewhere in the middle of all that craziness, because Joe Dispenza is doing some pretty wild stuff, and
Yeah.
he's radically changing a lot of paradigms in health and healing. And
yeah, and if we can look at astrology as a tool that you can use and then have a deeper understanding of who you came here to be, and then use tools like what Dr. Joe Dispenza is offering and really step into that even more, it supports us so much in having these resources so that we can view our life differently. I think one of the things that I've seen with a lot of our friends recently is this pull towards communal living. And I would imagine there's probably a lot going on in the realm of the astrology of us beginning to say, hey, it's maybe not as important that I survive and can pay all my bills living as a single person and be stressed all the time. Maybe something should be different. Maybe there should be more community. And there's this interesting thing where I think a lot of us are starting to feel that. I think especially in our kind of age range, and maybe not making that wrong, but kind of seeing what's beginning to shift culturally and allowing for that.
Yeah, I mean, just in the sense of a nuclear family, or monogamy, or the ways of working towards retirement, and just
working 12 hours a day for a paycheck. I mean, there's so
even
much
8 hours a day.
Yeah, even 8 hours a day. What are we doing? We should be playing more.
We really should be. So Luminous Possibilities is great because we're gathering voices and people who are wanting to envision a future that's different and that is more playful.
Yeah, what I loved when we recently did an Access Consciousness class, and one of the things that really stood out to me was that one of their sayings is that we're not here to change this reality, we're here to create a new one. And if we can support each other in connecting with those beings that are resonant with us and finding more ways to spend more playful time together and see what we're able to change in the world, I think there's going to be a huge impact over the next 3, 5, 10, 20, however many years. It's pretty exciting.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, it's amazing. Yeah, it's a way. I think we're just, I don't know, returning to, even in astrology, there's a way of seeing this greater overarching cycle in which we've entered this dark age of, this Piscean age, and we're moving into Aquarius. And it has so much more to do with community and coming out of the religious dogma and these ways of, I think there's been so much separation of mind, body, spirit. And so, and then so much like a prizing of the individual and but it's all included. I mean, so the individual has its place, and your uniqueness and your genius and your thing has a place in a community. And how do we
Spoken like a true Aries.
yeah. 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 Yeah, I suppose so. Yeah, so I mean, I guess what I really see my work like the astrology and the coaching, the body work,
And the
and then the
branding too.
branding,
Yeah.
it's all sort of, it's in the website development. It's the center of that really is radiance. It's, this path where living closely aligned and intimately with your values. And not many people know what their values are, but knowing what those values are and then living from them, acting from them, and choosing to find a sense of wealth and richness within and the inside out, and creating this greater picture of not just surviving but thriving in the world with more in general. I mean, we can just call in more abundance than I think we have. There's a lot of scarcity thinking. And so I guess, where the branding comes in for me is where like people get to authentically align to what's true for them. What do they have as a unique offering
Mm-hmm.
that they want to offer to the world? And using some of the coaching and astrology lenses to support people in that way has been incredible, because it's the clarity I think can happen faster sometimes with astrology. We don't have to play as much in the dark. It's sort of like turning the lights on and being like, oh, okay, like here's actually what's here. And it's not to say or tell a person what is true for them, right?
Right.
Because they get to decide. I mean, what resonates and what you choose, it's ultimately up to you. Astrology is a tool for accessing like creative potential.
Mm-hmm.
And it's up to us to choose like what parts of that we want to include. And I really love this branding process, because it's felt like such a marketing thing at first, like being in school and learning about some of that. But now, I mean, I've been looking for maybe a better word, but it seems to work pretty well. It's just, finding your own symbol, just there as there is for a planet,
Mm-hmm.
because we are also these planets or solar systems. And like a brand or a logo is oftentimes some symbol that really represents like what we're going for in our life, and what symbol we can communicate to our audiences or to our clients that might resonate in some way with our work and what we're here to do, and then be a gateway into more of what we love.
Yeah. I love the process, and I've gotten to talk to some of the people that have done that with you. And I think the level of guidance we can sometimes, as we step often into entrepreneurship, it can be a little bit scary. How am I going to find my clients? And I think the clearer we are about our offering and who we're here to be, the clearer messaging we're able to have to find those people that really are going to resonate with us, because not everyone's going to resonate with us. So the more specific we can get through using tools like astrology and coaching, I think it's a pretty magical thing we can accomplish.
Totally.
Awesome. Well, as we wrap up, tell people how they can get a hold of you, connect with you, and learn about your genius?
Thanks. Yeah, so we've got a website, luminouspossibilities.co, and there's a directory where you can find me and a number of other people, including yourself,
Including me, Stara.
on this directory, and just get more information, basic information about who we are, what it is we're offering. There's links to websites, there's contact information, and ways to book an appointment. And then, of course, there's a way to sign up for our newsletter, which is going to be, not too crazy regular, whether it's spammy. We want to release some good information, maybe comes out weekly or monthly, and then just keeps you in tune with our podcasts and other conversations we're having. But otherwise, KeenanWhite.com is a starting place if you want to go directly there.
Awesome. Well, thanks so much for letting me be a part of this conversation today. I've loved it.
Thanks for holding the space. Appreciate it.
Of course.